Chestnut and black pepper bread. The first thing that we're going to have to do is roast off the chestnuts. Now, for those of you that haven't roasted chestnut before, what you need to do is cut across in the flat side of the chestnut, okay? So you've obviously got the round side and you've got the flat side. So cut across in the flat side of the chestnut. Now, these are going to go into a hot oven for around about 15 minutes at about 200 degrees centigrade, only for 15 minutes. But as I said, one important thing about it is to make sure that the oven is preheated, so remember that. So these, like I said, cross cut in the flat side of the chestnut onto a tray and then into a preheated oven at 200 degrees centigrade for around about 15 minutes. Now, these chestnuts look like after they've come out of the oven. They're just out and they're still piping hot. So what we're going to do is let them cool down a little bit to where they're easy to handle. Peel the shell off. Make sure that the shell has gone completely off them. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to roughly chop them, and then I'm going to toast them again in the pan before I actually use them for the bread. So there's a little bit more work still left to do, but trust me, it's well worth it. Just get the knife in under the shell like that and peel it off. Make sure you just take off the back end of it here. You can see the black mark there. Just make sure you get rid of that. Now, the texture of them, it's very much like a hazelnut. You know, they've got a very mazy like quality to them when they're done. You can see here exactly what I'm talking about. You can see there is a bit of slight discoloration going on the inside of them, but I wouldn't worry about that, that's normal. Now, the one thing that I didn't mention to you is to make sure and shell them while they're still warm. The shell is really difficult to get off once they go cold. So as I said, when they've come down to a manageable level that you can actually handle them quite easy, start to take the shell off them, because as I said, they are a real pain in the backside to actually get the shell off once they've begun to cool down. So just remember that. Now you can see that I've chopped up the chestnuts fairly roughly. Nothing too fine there about those chestnuts, but what I want to do is I do want to give them a little bit of a toast off before we add them into the bread. So I'm just going to toast them off here for about 5 minutes, get the oils moving in the nuts itself, and then just transfer them straight into the bread mix. Now these nuts, the chestnuts here, are nearly ready, so just a little bit longer on the toasting and we'll be adding them to the bread. Now also for the bread here, what I have is 250 mils of milk and 150 mils of water. Now these have been warmed up to where they're lukewarm, and what I'm doing now is I'm adding in 30 grams of dried yeast, dried fast action yeast. Now what I want to do is just give this a stir around and leave it for a few minutes while the yeast kicks into life. When you're mixing the yeast into its liquid, whether it's milk or water, always make sure that it's lukewarm, and I do emphasize not lukewarm. Don't use cold, it'll take way too long for the yeast to activate, and don't use too hot. If you use too hot, what's going to happen is you're going to kill the yeast. Now these chestnuts here are ready. They've begun to brown up nicely, as you can see. And again, be careful when you're toasting them off. Don't burn them. Don't let them go black on you. You just want them browned off and dried out a little bit. You also want to just kickstart the process of the chestnuts, the flavour of the chestnuts being enhanced by the toasting. Okay, for the bread recipe, what exactly do we need? Well, we need 750 grams of strong bread flour. We need an ounce of sugar. We need a tablespoon of salt. We need a mixture of 250 mils of milk and we need 125 mils of water mixed together. Now these are going to be lukewarm because this is what you're going to be adding your yeast to. In regards to butter, you're going to add 1 ounce of butter, and you're going to add 3 large eggs or 4 small eggs that have been beaten. Now we're going to add the eggs in one at a time, but I'll show you as we go step by step. Okay, let's start off by adding in the sugar, the salt. Let's get these mixing. Now you can see I'm using a dough hook here, and the dough hook, don't use a spade, use the dough hook that you have, your dough hook attachment. So now I'm going to add in the butter. Okay, you can see now that I've added in the milk and the water with the yeast in it. The dough is starting to come together, but we're not quite finished yet. So I'm going to just let this go on a little bit longer before I add the eggs in. Okay, now I'm going to start adding the eggs in that have already been beaten. But I'm adding them in one at a time. I'm not adding the whole lot all together. The reason being is that I don't want the dough mix to become too wet. You can see the dough mix looks quite wet here. Don't worry about that. Just let the mixer do its work and it'll come together nicely for you. This dough is ready for the chestnuts. Now I'm going to add the chestnuts in while the dough is actually mixing. So this is the very last step now, is adding the chestnuts in at this stage. After we've done this, we're going to take the finish mixing the dough and take it off and let it proof. But when I've got, you'll know when the chestnuts have been mixed thoroughly. You'll hear that once again the sound of the dough hook, or should I say the sound of the bread mixer and the dough go nice and smooth in the bowl. So that's what the chestnut dough looks like. Now, right, now you can see it's 2 hours later, and you can see that the dough has doubled in size. The reason that the thing was all like a balloon on top and had risen up was because of the gas that the yeast generates inside. So now that is a wonderful, lovely rise on the dough, a great proof. So what we want to do now is, obviously we want to knock the dough back. Now how we knock the dough back is simply tip the dough out, give it a couple of quick turns, 2 or 3 times, and then we're going to put it on a tray and shape it and let it go for its next proof. And we're just going to pull the dough right out. As you can see here, I'm pulling it away, and all the air pockets inside you can see in here. So just put the dough right out onto the board like that, and you can see now from what's left inside there that it's come away relatively clean. So to knock the dough back, what are we doing? This simply quick 1, 2, and that's it. The dough has been now knocked back. Now all that's left to do is to shape it. Okay, now what I'm doing is I'm rolling the bread out to what will resemble a cigar shape, because I want to plait this. So it's very straightforward. Just keep following what I'm doing here in regards to rolling the bread out. Now I want this one end of the bread to be semicircular, and I want the other end of the bread to be narrower. So now that I have that, the next thing to do is to cut the bread into 3. So I want to cut back a little bit further actually, and just get your knife and cut 3 even legs like that. Now you can see the texture of the bread, full of air pockets. Okay, so I'm going to keep this plait fairly tight because I want to try and get as many braids in as I can. So just cross over like this, and at the same time stretch out the dough as you're crossing over. And that's it. Now with this last bit of the braid, just tuck it underneath the bread like that, okay? And that's it then. Now this bread is ready to go onto a tray and go for its final proof. So when it's ready to go into the oven, I'll bring you back. Now you can see that this bread has proven on its second proof to be an absolute monster. Absolutely fantastic. Now I prefer a nice hard crust on the outside of the bread, so I'm not putting any water into the oven with the bread. But like I said, if you like a soft crust, put a pan of water into the oven 10 to 12 minutes before you actually put the bread in. So there's a tip for you. So hard crust, soft crust. Anyway, on with things. So what I'm going to do now is egg wash this, and then I am going to put the black cracked peppercorns on the outside of the bread and some pink Himalayan sea salt just for garnish. So make sure you get a good egg wash all around the bread, and make sure also as well that the oven is preheated before you put the bread in. Remember that, that's very important. You want to have the oven on it for at least 15 minutes before you put the bread into the oven. So important. Now next is the pepper. So the pepper now how peppery you like the bread is completely optional. I personally don't like it just tasting of pepper, but you can of course put on as much or as little as you want. It's completely up to you. So that's about right for me now. And then last but not least is some of the sea salt. So I'm going to put some here. I'm just going to run it down the center of the bread like so. And that's it. Okay, this is ready for the oven. Now the bread is going to go into the oven at a temperature, if you're using a fan oven, put it in at about 200 degrees centigrade, which non-fan is about 215 electric, 220 electric, or 425 Fahrenheit, or gas mark 7.5, gas mark 8. But put it in for about 40 to 45 minutes and keep an eye on it, because the last thing that you want to do is burn the bread, burn all the lovely work that you've done. So let's get this into the oven, and when it's ready to come out, I'll bring you back and I'll show you what it looks like. Now, boys and girls, here is our bread straight from the oven, literally from the oven this second. So that's it folks, the bread is just straight out of the oven now, piping hot. It's turned into an absolute monster, which is exactly what I wanted. This is a super bread. It's perfect for this time of the year. It's seasonal with chestnuts. If you want to put a little bit of extra effort into, you know, for your Christmas, whatever the case may be, party, whatever, dinner, try this. The only thing about it is it does take a little bit of time. It is time consuming, okay? By the time you have all the proving done, so on and so forth, it does take a bit of time. So, how do you know when the bread is done? Well, let's turn it over. You can see here, you hear that? Now, that's the sound of the bread. It should have a hollow sound when it's cooked. This is going to be a really nice bread, I know just by the smell of it. So let's cut it open and see what it looks like. Let's listen for the crunch. Now, there you go. The bread is perfectly risen, very light, as you can see here, and it's laced with chestnuts all the way through it. The chestnuts didn't sink in the dough or anything like that. They've just stayed perfectly. So like I said to you, give it a shot. If you've never tried a chestnut bread before, or if you've never tried to bake bread before, you can leave out the chestnuts and just follow the recipe through as I did there, and you'll have a perfect bread. But as I said to you, give it a try. It is a little bit special, and of course it's seasonal.